All right, let's look at our next task, and that is to add filters to the issue list. And it says here that we need to filter the issue list so that we can easily narrow down that list while searching for issues matching certain criteria. So if we only want to look at issues dealing with errors, then we want to look at those. We can look at the status, we want to look at the level, and then the project name. So if we look over here, we want to filter our issues according to what type of issue it is. We want to filter according to the levels, what type of levels, and then also project names. So front-end web, back-end, and the ML service. We also want to reset the values here. I can revert them back to their default. And then we want to be able to persist these filters after the page is refreshed. This is the candidate for the URL. Yes, creating a shareable page, including the selected filters, can be achieved by adding the filter parameters to the URL. Right. And so if we have that parameters up here and I hit refresh, then when that page component reloads, I should get the same issues back again. Honestly, nothing should look like it's changing, although it is. All right, and then to see what those parameters look like, we can look at the API docs. So here we have our issue request, our parameters, we have our page, limit, status, level, project. So let's check out what that might look like. Let's say we look at all the error ones, then here's our parameters that will be sent to the API to get the information back. And here's the information that we get back, and we see that they are all at the level error. Our first task then is going to be making those requests to the API such that we can put information, that state that we need, into that URL, make those requests to the API, get back that information, and then render it to the page. After we render it to the page, then it's just a matter of creating that UI, the user interface, and updating the URL itself. I think that's how we should go about it. All right, so let's look at our task. We want to be able to set up an API call. So we want to be able to enter some filters into a URL that then we will make an API call with those new parameters. And it might be helpful to look at the overall user experience and see where our task fits into it. So if we're here at the issues page, and let's say the user wants to find all the issue tasks that have a level of error. Well, when they click that button, the router query parameters will be updated. And so we'll get something like level error. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those query parameters, then we're going to make a new call to the API with those new query parameters. And so we'll be creating something like this. All right, we'll update it with level error. We'll make a new request, and then we'll get back all our data. And then they will be rendered here on the page. So that's what our task looks like. And I'll write up some code, then we'll come back and see it in action. Okay, so let's look at what we did. So when the user clicks, he's going to update the router, the URL. And so what we're going to do is we're going to grab those query params that are inside the router object, and we're going to create a new filters object from those query params. So we know that we want to pass a status, level, and project. So we'll create a filters object with those key values, and then we'll pass it into our issues request. Something else that we do on the page is add it to our navigation to new pages. So if the user was to, let's see over here, if the user is to click this button, then we will update that router with the new pages. And with that update, we will also send along those filters. Now, when we get into the issues, it'll come in here and we need to update the query. So we're caching some of our data so that if we refresh a page or not, we don't have to make another API call. We can just instantly get that data. So that's what we also want to do. We want to update the query keys. But the big thing is right here where we want to make those issue calls. And you'll notice too that we created a type and we placed it along with the other of the other types. So our this should be um, issue status. So we have a issue filters type here with some updated enums. So that gets sent off here, and then we pass it in to the parameters that is making that API call. So that's how we did it. So just to recap, the big idea here is when the user clicks, the router and URL is updated. What we're going to do is we are going to extract those parameters, creating a new filters object, sending that filters object into the issues request. In the interim, though, we need to update the query key for caching purposes. And so that's what we do there. And we add it to the parameters for the Axios call. So what that looks like, if we hit level error, and now we get back all of our level error warning, we'll get back all the warning. Status, where we did status, open, here are all of our open ones. All right, and so the next task then would be to create the UI so that the user can then select it, and then we'll connect the pieces together. All right, so let's look at what we did here. We're working on adding the select and input components and then connecting the filter changes to the URL and making that API call. So let's look at briefly what it looks like. So the user will click, the URL parameters will change, and then we'll get the rendering of the appropriate issues. And if we put in project name, we'll get all the issues according to that project. And then we can reset it as well. So what I did was I extracted the code. It was getting a bit heavy, so I extracted the components to their own component, and then I extracted the filtering functionality to its own hook. So our issue filters will have a parent container, and I added that button in there just because. And then with that button, next to that button, we have our different filters. Here we are accessing that hook and getting the status value and setting it to the select value. Here we have our change, and we're receiving that object and then setting its value to align with the filter key values. So the status will then receive the value of the incoming object as well as the other select component. And in the input, I had created a debounce function in a previous project, so I just incorporated it here. This will allow us to not have to make so many calls. So if we look down here, if I type in quickly and it's back, right? So if I type in slow, I have the B, the A. If I type quickly, back, so back. This filter change is coming from the use hook. So let's take a look at that. We'll accept the filters, and then basically we are just squashing it to a new object. We are destructuring and replacing any new values with the old values. Now I did add another function here, removing the empty values. So if I did, we could technically have projects blank. It's not very clean. So I added a function that removes it, and we can take a look at that. Essentially, the filters are coming in and we're converting them to arrays so that we can then operate on them with the array methods, such as filter. So we're filtering them. We're just evaluating the value and not the key. And we know that empty values have a falsy value. So this Boolean will return false. Empty strings have a falsy value. And then we're just checking it again that it is not empty. And if that's the case, then we will return that key value pair. Otherwise, we will keep it. Something else we did was we just went ahead and made it mobile first. So when I get down to lower dimension, we see this UI. So that's really nice. And there you have it. We've created the issue filters that will update the issues according to their status level and project name.